All right, so I think we have several here. So let's take a look. The first uh, question says the determinants of price elasticity of demand. Consider some determinants of the price elasticity of demand. Number one, the availability of close substitutes. Number two, whether the good is a necessity or a luxury. Number three, how broadly you define the market. And number four, the time horizon being considered. A good without any close substitute is likely to have relatively inelastic or elastic demand, since consumers cannot easily switch to a substitute good if the price of the good rises. So here we are really looking at elasticity, I think, for this question. I think for the next few questions. And so what we have to keep in mind is what exactly is the definition of price elasticity, right? And so it essentially tells us the responsiveness of demand, of quantity demanded to changes in price. It's given by the following equation. Elasticity is equal to percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price. And so if we change price by a little bit, how much can we expect quantity demanded to change? And so then the next question is, what are kind of like the metrics of what is considered elastic or inelastic? Essentially, anything with elasticity less than 1 is going to be considered inelastic. Anything with elasticity greater than 1 is going to be considered elastic. Inelastic simply means that when price changes, the quantity demanded changes relatively less. So it's less. So demand is less responsive to price changes than we would expect normally. Whereas elastic demand is referring to the opposite scenario where quantity demanded is more responsive to price changes than we would normally expect to be the case. And so, with those two definitions in mind, we can take a look at this first question again. It says, a good without any close substitutes is likely to have relatively inelastic or elastic demand since consumers cannot easily switch to a substitute good if the price of the good rises. And so, this sounds like a scenario where consumers are basically almost stuck purchasing a certain good because even if the price rises, there are very few other things they can buy to substitute for this good, right? So they're kind of stuck buying this good no matter what. And so that seems like a scenario that's going to be more suited towards inelastic demand, which is a scenario where, again, price has relatively low effect on quantity demanded. And so that's going to be the answer choice we choose due to that lack of substitute goods. And that is generally the case when we are talking about substitutes and elasticity of demand. The next question says, and let's check the answer for that on the bottom to make sure that we also got the same answer as the previous tutor. Right, and so the first question, inelastic demand, when there is no close substitutes, consumers find it hard to replace and have to still buy even if the price is high. Right, so that's the same rationale that we just talked about. Let's take a look at number 2. A good's price elasticity of demand depends in part on how necessary it is relative to other goods. If the following goods are priced approximately the same, which one has the least elastic demand? And so this is going to that question of necessity, and it gives us two options, a diamond necklace or an amputation procedure for diabetes sufferers. So the question asks us for which one of us has the least elastic demand, aka the most inelastic demand. And so we're looking for which one of these would a price change not really have an effect on the quantity demanded. And we would most likely say that for diamond necklaces, maybe there's elastic demand, maybe there's inelastic demand, depending on what the price is. For B, amputation procedures for diabetes sufferers, that's going to be something that we would say definitely has inelastic demand. And the reason for that is because these are some procedures that are incredibly necessary, and so price is unlikely to have a significant impact on how much demand there is for these procedures, right? You can think of a scenario in which you could raise the price by 200%, and for many of these diabetes sufferers, they would still probably demand the amputation procedures that are being offered because they're necessary for continuing to live. And so that would be something that we consider to have very inelastic demand, and so we would probably pick amputation procedures over diamond necklaces for a good that is the least elastic. And that would be the correct answer there. So let's take a look at the answer choice that the previous tutor gave. So previous tutor also said amputation procedures for diabetes sufferers, and said that has the least elastic demand. This is because someone who's suffering from diabetes has no option to follow the medication and the related procedure, no matter how expensive it may be if one needs to be cured. However, diamonds have an elastic demand because they're considered a luxury good, and the demand would fall with a rise in price. Yeah, so I think that's pretty good. I would it's demand is going to fall with a rise in price for uh, you know for amputation procedures for diabetes patients as well, but it's just going to fall less. And so, just want to make that one distinction. The law of demand tells us that if price rises, quantities demanded goes down. But relatively speaking, the reduction in quantity demand is very little, and indicates that you have perfectly inelastic demand, then it actually wouldn't go down at all. So that would be the answer to number 2. So then let's talk about number 3, the price elasticity of a good. Price elasticity of demand for a good also depends on how you define the good. Organize the goods found in a following table by indicating which is likely to have the most elastic demand, which is likely to have the least elastic demand, and which will have demand that falls in between. And we have 3 categories. We have food, red bell peppers, and vegetables. Most elastic in between, least elastic. And so this is going to that question of how broadly we categorize a good. And so the more broadly we categorize a good, the less elastic it becomes, because you're asking people to basically price or give up more and more, or larger range of things when you have a broad category than a small range. And so it'll be hard to find substitutes for very broad range goods when it's compared to finding substitutes for very specifically narrow range goods. So let's look at food, for example. So among food, out of our categories of red bell peppers, vegetables, and food is going to be the broadest category, and that would make it the least elastic. And we can think of an example for this. There is no substitute really for food in terms of the need it fulfills, and so it's gonna by even the same rationale as the first 2 things we talked about, which were necessity and what was the other one? Close substitutes. Food has very few close substitutes and is also very necessary. And so, by that logic, by defining this very broad category, we make this the least elastic category. The second thing we'll talk about real quickly is vegetables. And so it's a little bit narrower than food, but more broad than red bell peppers. And so we'll probably say it's in between in terms of elasticity. Because when we go to the third option, which is red bell peppers, this is a very specific and narrow category of food, and so it's going to have a lot of substitutes. You can think of green bell peppers or yellow bell peppers as substitutes, and it's also going to be not that necessary. We don't need to eat red bell peppers the way we need to eat food, and so that's going to make it the most elastic in terms of a price change would probably let us pick a lot of other things rather than just red bell peppers, and so that's going to be the most elastic. So let's take a look at the answer given by the tutor. Food would be categorized as the least elastic because it has no close substitute. Vegetable elasticity is in between, as you could find substitutes for vegetables like fruits. Red bell peppers have the most elastic because of close substitutes like green and yellow bell peppers. Great. So exact same things that we talked about before. So no problems with that. And finally, the last question says the price elasticity of demand is also affected by the given time horizon. If the price of gasoline is relatively high for a long time, consumers are more likely to buy more fuel-efficient cars or switch to alternatives like public transportation. Therefore, the demand for gasoline is A, less, B, more, C, no more nor less elastic in the short run than in the long run. So this is going to that last factor or determinant of elasticity, which talks about time horizon. And so what we're seeing there is that this question of how does having a short run versus a long run horizon affect how elastic something is, and the explanation in the beginning already breaks down that in the long run, consumers have more time to adjust their long-term behavior, like buying a new car or switching their daily habits. And so, given more time, all things are more elastic because you give consumers more time to adjust, to find substitutes, or to make lifestyle changes that make a good less necessary in their daily lives. And so, generally speaking, we would think in the long run, goods are more elastic, and in the specific case of gasoline, we also think that in the long run, goods are more elastic. So in the short run, they would be less elastic. So that would be A. Let's take a look at the answer choice. 4 says less elastic. With the passage of time, new technologies develop and more substitutes are available in the long run. Thus, the demand becomes relatively elastic in the long run. However, in the short run, there are less or no close substitutes available, and the demand becomes relatively inelastic. And so I'll just clarify really quickly that there's also this idea of like giving consumers more time to adjust. Also, in the long run, consumers are given more time to adjust their behavior or find they said more find more substitutes for the good, which makes demand more elastic. Okay, and otherwise that would be the correct answer.